All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Caitlin. I am the administrative assistant at the Frederick County Chamber of Commerce. I just wanted to go ahead and say thank you to all of you for being here today. And of course, to the staff at Deleon and Stang for putting on today's presentation. We have a few more virtual events coming up, including a virtual roundtable with the Maryland Comptroller, Peter Franchel. It's going to be today at 1:30 p.m. And then we also have a webinar on leading through great challenges. That's going to be presented by Frederick Community College on 6/25. That's next week at 10 a.m. So if you're interested in attending any more of those events, feel free to go ahead and check them out on the Chamber website. And other than that, I'll go ahead and pass things off to Brett to get started.
All right, thanks, Caitlin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brett Friedman. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Deleon Stang CPAs and Business Advisors. A couple items here. We've muted everyone. You're just going to see the slides. You're not going to see the speakers today. We will get to all of your questions at the end. If you want to submit questions using the Q&A box, we will fire off some answers throughout the presentation, and anything we can't get to during the presentation, we will get to after. And yes, the slides will be available after the webinar. At Deleon Stang, we made the choice day one to dive into the CARES Act and begin digesting what is the largest stimulus and relief package ever. It's now been about 3 months that our incredible business advisory team has spent most of their time digesting, understanding, and presenting on the act, not to mention continuing to help our clients navigate these uncharted waters. Even as we present today, there continues to be updated guidance. For the latest updates, we suggest you follow us on social media and check our website, deleonandstang.com. We will continue to work passionately to help in the best way we can, guiding businesses to survive and thrive through the pandemic. Our main speaker today is Brad Hoffman. Brad is co-managing partner of Deleon Stang CPAs and Business Advisors. For those of you who don't know, Deleon Stang is a professional services firm focused on helping you succeed through strategic business insights and practical advice that keeps you moving. And we'll let Brad take it from here.
All right. Well, good morning, Frederick and surrounding areas. We've, as Brett mentioned, we've dug into this for quite a period of time now. It's actually kind of crazy as we look back at the calendar and seeing how long we've been invested in the PPP world. Wanted to take a quick moment before we got off this page. The CARES team, we pivoted literally kind of day one as the CARES Act was released, and pulled the entire business team off of taxes and pivoted towards the CARES Act and consulting with businesses. And you know, it's built a lot of goodwill, but it's also helped a lot of people. I think at this point we've helped over 200 and some businesses in some capacity with either a CARES component or the PPP loan process. Our team consists of our chief research officer, Najee Lakis. Stephen Korinsky is our business service manager. He's also on the call today. Obviously John up above, and Danny Rosamondo. And we also have Clint Lehman on here. He's one of my partners in the nonprofit arena and has been instrumental in helping to facilitate nonprofits getting the help they need through us. We, as Brett mentioned, our tagline or our slogan is uses 2 words: strategic and practical. We don't pride ourselves on going through a lot of codes and regs as we explain things to people, and you won't see that today. We try to take a very practical approach to how we can manage to help people get through this stuff. So forgive me as a CPA if I don't use a whole bunch of code and go down that direction. All right, so it wouldn't be a PPP presentation without some form of a disclaimer. While we strive to find our own positions on everything first, we then also seek out what the industry is doing and make sure that there's nothing outlying that we're missing and that others are finding. And we make our own interpretations, and I'll talk about some of those as we go through this, because we do occasionally deviate from what some people do, but I believe it's in the best interest of our clients and our people. Yeah, I did a presentation yesterday morning, and an hour and a half before the presentation, we realized that between the hours of 1:30 last Monday night and Tuesday morning, they had actually released the new SBA application for forgiveness, the instructions for that, and a new EZ application. The interesting part about anytime we get guidance from the SBA and Treasury as it relates to this PPP program, I kind of equate it to when you look when you're buying something on Amazon and it says some assembly required, and we kind of get the box, the guidance, and the instructions aren't really in there. So you're trying to figure it out, and that's kind of where everyone is on this. And so everybody's taking the best position they can with the most logical approach possible, and following all the rules that we possibly can. So there's our disclaimer. We are going to go through, generically speaking, the PPP forgiveness process. Also understanding the updates that I just spoke about, and some of these updates, if you've been in any of our other webinars, I think this is our 8th one. This one contains the updates that were brought upon us past the actual CARES Act. We've done a good job of staying on top of this, but the whole way out through it, we knew that additional guidance was coming, additional changes were coming, and they made no bones about it that they were making additional changes. So we've kind of put all the updates that we can and updated as to where it is now, literally yesterday, as far as our interpretations go. And then we'll talk about the two forgiveness applications, and we'll just kind of go through all the highlights of each of these. This thing's far too complex to get down into the weeds too far. So if you've been through any of the other webinars, and by now I'm sure you've heard or thought about or been asked about, whether or not or how you're going to get full forgiveness, and that does exist. There's also this notion that there's reductions, and that actually, it may not be the end of the world, but we're going to walk through what the reductions are, what the new updates are, and how they get applied, and how it works. So, and I'm going to go kind of quick because there's a lot to get through, and we'll do questions at the end of this. I take that back. If you have questions, our team is standing by on the chat line to answer your questions as we go, and then we'll follow up at the end with additional questions. But understanding the loan forgiveness, we have several different components of this. Obviously, the eligible costs. We'll go through those. The 25% reduction, the 25% limit on non-payroll costs, and the new update on that brought to us by the Flexibility Act, bringing it to 40%. Then, of course, the 25% of reduction of wages and or rate of wages, and the FTE calculation, and then the 7(a), so other SBA loans, probably most predominantly the ideal loan that they actually have given us a little clarity on how that gets removed from forgiveness if you had any ideal loan, and the factors that come into play. So depending upon what costs you used to obtain both of these loans could add or remove it to the equation. So not going to go into great detail about that because that's more of a one-off, and we can answer those questions individually. All right, so the important dates, and some of these have changed. The dates are actually the same. The validity of them has changed, or how they're applied. We still have the terminology of loan origination date. And that being essentially the start of your covered period. It was 8 weeks. It's now 24 weeks, and we'll go into that in much more detail in a little bit, with a available election to actually go back to 8. We have the February 15th through the June 19th test period, January 1st through February 29th, 2020 test dates. There still are test dates for FTE counts comparative to our 8-week or 24-week period. And then there's June 30. That made most of the news, really, as restore your FTEs and your people by June 30 and everything's good. Well, that's that date, and there's a lot that goes into that statement right there. But that date has actually been moved on down the road to December 31st. The June 30th date is still relevant, as they've came back and said, okay, we're gonna stop allowing applications for the loan as of June 30. So it's still a relevant date, even though it's in the act it had been moved to December 31st. All right, here begins the fun. Covered period. So covered period starts upon your loan origination date, at least by the original CARES Act. So the day you received your dollars from the bank, they got into your bank account, that started your covered period. Then they brought out the original application and they gave us an alternate period. And the alternate period allowed you to move your 8-week period to match your pay cycles. Well, with the Flexibility Act, they retroactively essentially changed the CARES Act to state 24 weeks. So you have a 24-week period now, unless you choose not to, and you received your loan proceeds prior to June 5th. And I'll go a little bit more into that in a minute. Also, you come out of the gate with your covered period being the date of loan receipts, and then the 24 weeks after that, you also have the alternate covered period for the 24 weeks. So there's, for some people, for a lot of people, there will be actually 4 different options available to select your covered period. Okay. Now we'll get into this, and this will be one of the few times where we try to actually go through an example for understanding, but right now a lot of people's covered period is ending, and they're calling and they're saying, okay, what do I do? And there's, as I mentioned, 4 different options, so there's a lot of different ways that you can skin this cat, so to speak. I'll start with the fact that I'm going to use an example here that uses an 8-week period, or an 8-week covered period, simply because I can fit all the calendars on the screen and you can actually see them. So we're going to start with the fund date, the day you received your dollars. That's going to be April 22nd, and that's marked with our green X there. So that's when our covered period starts under original rules. It then goes all the way out through June 17th. That is 8 weeks from the date you were funded, lands you in June 17th. The alternate covered period starts on April 27th. And I should qualify this by saying PS stands for payroll start. So the start of your pay period. PE is your pay period end, your pay period end date. Your CD is your check date. So in this example on April, we have a period start for 13, period end for 24, and our check date was May 1st for that. And while that seems confusing, it's very relevant. So I'll keep going here. Start date for alternate covered period, our start date is April 27th, because that's the start of the first pay period immediately after funding. And your alternate covered period goes from April 27th out through June 19th, which correlates to the 8-week period that would coincide with those pay periods. Okay. Now we will add just one more degree of complexity to this, but not just one, there's going to be many. They added in the application, the original application, that your costs are paid or incurred, not both, paid or incurred. What's that mean? Well, let's use an example for the covered period. If my original covered period, the old method, if you will, starts on April 22nd, I get pay period. I get my check date. So paid or incurred. Paid check that are paid are going to be the 1st, the 15th, the 29th, and the 12th of June. The last check received or sent out to the employees prior to my end date of 17 would be the 12th. Now, here comes the incurred part. Because my check date on the 12th was for my pay period from the 25th to the 5th, I actually get to now accrue payroll for the 6th through the 17th, my end date. And, you know, good luck, banks. That's you know, a little tidbit there. Like, I really have no idea how they're going to try to police this or enforce these, you know, and reconcile these, because, you know, this is all accounting stuff, and, you know, it's going to be challenging, to say the least, for them. And it's just because that's not what they're geared to do, and it's pretty unfair for the SBA to kind of ask them to do it. So be patient with your, with your banks. My next example would be my alternate covered period. So keep in mind the paid or accrued. Now with the alternate period, I'm going to start with incurred costs. So my payroll for the 27th through the 8th is my first pay period. Then my following will be ending 22nd, then the 5th, then the 19th. So I have my 8 weeks with full pay periods that would be ending on the 19th. Now, ironically, on the alternate period, or alternate cover period, it's paid or incurred. So that's my incurred. But if you go back to the 1st of May, I actually paid a check in May for payroll that was earned prior to my covered period starting. But the rules state paid or incurred. Our interpretation is that that counts as well. So there's room to move inside of these. And that's going to be relevant. And this all applies to the 24-week period too. I just didn't want to have 24 calendars on here. So you really ought to be working with folks to understand what your payroll is. If you had really light payroll in the beginning of your covered period because everyone was gone, then you may want to, shift to the end and use one method over the other. Like if everything's shifted to the end, the regular method may still very well work because you're accruing, you're reaching out farther on that. Again, everyone's situation is going to be much different. Spend a bunch of time there. We need to keep moving. Let's see. Okay. Understanding the provisions, the costs that are allowed. Okay, here's where I talked about the incurred cost and for paid or incurred. We'll go down now to the payroll cost updates. Here are associated with partners, S-corps, owners, and self-employed. There's an update on those coming after the next slide. And then there's a max compensation update associated with both employees and on the partners section of this. Also, and then of course you have your interest, your rent, and your payments on utilities. All these are components of your cost bucket that you get to use towards this. The one interesting thing that we found here also with the paid or incurred. So if you had rent that you hadn't paid because everybody was gone and no one was coming in, you didn't have any money, you were scared, and you paid all that during your covered period to catch it up and then kept your rent current, we believe you'd be able to take that and use all those rent costs. Now we still have some other thresholds to deal with, but they would qualify for paid or incurred during your covered period. Just, you can't do both. You can't pay it and then, try to accrue it as well for the same expenses. All right, we're going to start with the employees and what the changes were with them. So not much of a change on the 8-week people who choose to use the 8-week period, still maxing them out at the 15,385. That's the 850 seconds of $100,000. The 24-week folks, we just literally got this yesterday, because it wasn't part of the Flexibility Act, they didn't define it. But for the 24 weeks, for people who choose the 24-week covered period, your max wage allowable is the 46,154, which is 24.50 seconds. That will greatly impact people's ability to get full forgiveness. Now, we have some FTE things that we got to worry about, but that will impact their ability to pack their cost bucket with enough costs to get them to a place where they can or could get fully forgiven. I have a note here, no guidance on whether or not we can apply early yet. Meaning it says 8 or 24 weeks. There's talk, and some of the instructions allude to the sooner of, your application date or December 31st on things, but we believe we're stuck with an 8-week or a 24-week period, meaning that if you needed 10 weeks to get all your cost, we're not sure that they're going to let us go ahead and submit the application in 10 weeks and stop your rules associated with wages and FTEs at the 10-week mark. We believe they're going to make us walk it out to 24 weeks. All right. So on the owners, this was actually a lot of big changes that they kind of reduced our abilities. And frankly, most of the adjustments that Treasury and Congress and everybody made were pro-business. This is one of the few that they weren't. And what they did was, you still get your wage, if you will, eligible costs for the owners partnerships and self-employed. You just don't get health insurance, and you don't get any of the retirement components. They were removed as an allowable cost. Excuse me. Other thing to note, so 8 weeks, I mentioned earlier that it was the 15,000, the 850 seconds, or your current year payments inside of your covered period, but they added clarity on this, and it's actually also limited to 850 seconds of 2019's earnings. Now, that seems a little self-explanatory, but you have to think of it. If you were a partnership that didn't have a lot of earnings last year, or maybe you had depreciation, whatever, say your net income was really low and you didn't do guaranteed payments, and let's say you only had $5,000 partnership net income, but this year, things moved around and you didn't have all that depreciation, so you had cash and you were able to pay yourself and it was going to generate taxable income, you're still limited. And you paid all that to yourself in the 8-week period or the 24-week period, you're still limited to the 850 seconds of 2019's earnings. Now, move to the 24-week period, and they've said, okay, we're not going to just let you have 24 or 50 seconds as an owner. They cap that at 2.5 months of 2019's earnings, or i.e. 20,833, which is the 2.5 months times 100,000 salary of 100,000. The S corps, and this is SBA, they're definitely not law writers. Up to this point, they had mentioned or inferred to owner employees 33 times through all the various regs or not regs, but instructions, and never defined it. Well, they finally defined it, and they've labeled in their S corp owners, and they've said that they're not going to allow health insurance for S corp owners. And any of you S corp owners, at the end of the year, your payroll people ask you, hey, how much was your health insurance for you or your families? They have to include that in your W-2. So they actually did tie tax and SBA PPP rules together, included that in there, disallowed it from an additional cost standpoint. Basically, you're capped at 100 in total. S corp owners are still, capped at the current year's contributions during an 8-week period, or 8/52 of 2019. They are also subject to the same 2.5 of 2019, or capped at 2833. That stuff right there is new. Feel free to shoot questions on that if you have it, because I went through that quick and it's a little confusing. I'm doing on time. Doing okay. So non-payroll costs, not much changed here. Didn't really give us much in the way of clarity, didn't really take much away. One example we did find that we as a firm were, I'll say hesitant on, because there was no guidance and it seemed, I don't want to say too good to be true, but it just stood out as a cost, is the transportation. There was an example given of gas associated with a company car. Our belief is that they're inferring that fuel associated with your company vehicles would be allowable as a utility cost. Now, that helps, and many of our contractors and tradespeople, like they burn a lot of fuel. You're going to need it. I would believe it to be with your company car as a utility, and probably not with your dozers and your equipment, as that potentially could be looked at as a cost of good. So talk with your tax counsel or your legal counsel and just make sure that you're at a comfortable place in what you're using there. All right. Independent contractors. Boy, did they kind of cleared the water on these guys. So with the original instructions that came out for them, they basically said that they were going to take whatever you used to apply for the loan, the 2019 Schedule C, that created your calculation to get your loan. They were going to use that same Schedule C and do 8/52 of it, and that was going to be your forgiveness number. And then you had to try to figure out if you could find some, rent, utilities, and that kind of stuff in order to get the other $5,000 removed, or 5,200, whatever it is. Well, with the 24-week period, now you're moved up to the 20,833. So kind of how we're reading this is, if you have income again this year and you got a loan of 20,833 when you apply, and you have income sufficient again this year, that it's going to be pretty much you need to go through all the motions and fill out the form, but you're going to be eligible for forgiveness, just based on how they have the applications and the instructions lined up. Some have argued that it's just going to be automatic because they're using the 19 Schedule C. I'm still hesitant to say that here. I think you still want to make sure that your bank or whoever you're working with using their guidelines to go through that process. But I believe it to be good news for the Schedule Cs and 1099 contractors. They also would be eligible to use the 3508 EZ, which is the easy portion of the application. It's still not exactly small, but it's easier. All right, getting into, we got some more good news here on the 25% reduction. So originally they said if you reduced your employees' total wages by more than 25%, you had to basically penalize yourself for the difference between what you paid them and what 75% of their salary would have been. And it was quarter one compared to your covered period. They helped clarify that, and I'll go to the next slide because it's more details. They've broken the application down into a Schedule A, and then there's two tables on there. Well, Table 1 sends everyone there who is paid during your covered period, was an employee, and during 2019, and was under $100,000 in 2019 of annual comp. and those who were actually not employed during 2019, but are employed during your covered period. That does break down and remove some folks, and they've removed owners from this calculation as well now. So they isolated down who is going to have the calculation. They've also defined a little bit of what it is that they're applying the reduction calculation to. And they've more definitively said it's the rate. So if you reduce their hourly rate by more than 25%, you have a 25% reduction issue. If their salary, if you reduce their annual salary by more than 25%, you have a reduction issue. And that's based on, like, you know, if your salary based over the whole year, what the per pay period amount of that was. If you reduced that by more than 25%, that's where you start to trip and trigger your issues. The dot 3 there on the hourly calculation, I'll tell you, like, you're just going to need to get some assistance with somebody, because they literally, you have to do per their instructions, you have to do the calculation per employee and apply it out. And it's the decrease in their comp, the difference between decrease in their comp and the difference between that and 25% of the decrease in their comp. Then you multiply their average hours, multiply that by the number of weeks that you are, whether it's 8 or 24, and that comes up with a number. What we're finding as a firm is that most companies did not actually decrease folks' rates. Most of the time they decrease the hours. And this test applies to the rate. The hours being reduced goes over to the FTE count. Then we have the safe harbor. Lots of talk again about, you know, restore their comp by, it was June 30, now it's 12/31, and you can get safe harbored. Let me tell you that thing. Remember my example in the beginning where we ordered something that said some assembly required and didn't have instructions. Well, with the safe harbor, they send instructions now and they're in a different language. So we're just looking at the pictures and we're going through it, figuring it out. It is definable and it's calculatable, but it is far more complex than I could put on a webinar and try to explain out, quite frankly. All right, moving along. The next test or reduction, this one's actually applied at the end of all the other calculations. Actually, I take it back. It's applied right before the FTE number on here, FTE reduction. It used to be you had to spend at least 75% or no more than 25% of your eligible costs could be non-payroll, your rent, your utilities, you know, those items, interest. Now they've upped that to 40%. A lot in the news about it, restaurants, hotels, the hospitality industry greatly suffering, many industries suffering. And not able to do that, but they still had immense amounts of cost. Moved it to 40. There was original talk from some of the congressmen that said, if you didn't hit 60% of payroll costs, that you were going to get zero forgiveness. Minucci came out in press conference and confirmed that they were going to give partial forgiveness if you didn't get there. And we've demonstrated that in some of the other webinars we had. So if you had a $100,000 loan and you paid 50 in payroll and you had 50 in other costs, your total forgiveness would, and this is very simplistic calculation, but total forgiveness would end up being reduced down to 83,333, 50 grand in payroll, 33,333 in non-payroll, getting you back in ratio check. That puts you at 60% payroll, 40% non-payroll costs. Very simplistic. We go into much more detail with folks if you have questions. All right, now the FTE test. The FTE test is where most people are hung up. And I said earlier, most clients, most borrowers didn't just reduce someone's rate. They just couldn't bring them back as much. They didn't have as many hours. They couldn't bring as many people back. And that's how they controlled their costs. Well, the FTE test actually had a very big impact on the forgiveness number because it's a multiplier, and it impacted the ultimate ability to receive loan forgiveness much quicker than many of the other ones. Simply, I'll go through this quick because I want to hit the updates. You picked one of those test periods that we mentioned earlier, February 15th through June 30th, 19, or January 1st through February 29th, 20. Compared that to your FTE period during your covered period. So average weekly FTEs during your test period compared to your average FTEs during your covered period, either 8 or 24, brings you up with a number on each side. One could be 1, one could be 7, and then you have a 70% ratio. 70% is what you were allowed to have of your total cost bucket in loan forgiveness. They didn't change much in how that was applied. In fact, I don't think they changed much at all in how that calculation happened. What they did do on the next page is they gave us some more outs. They originally had an out. We got this early in the ballgame and we thought it was a huge victory, was the inability to hire individuals who were employees because you gave an offer and they didn't take it, and that freed you up from being penalized on theirs. Then they added termination for cause, or they quit. So those folks didn't count against you in this calculation. Well, now in the Flexibility Act, they added A and B, as you see here. Inability to hire an individual back and inability to hire a similar qualified employee for unfilled positions. Okay, that stands alone, and that's one of them. That can get you safe harbor from the FTE test, and we think this is the bigger one, I mentioned earlier, we're practical. I rarely will read from a rule or code section or anything like that, but for this, I'm going to for a second. Or is able to document an inability to return to the same level of business activity as such business was operating at before February 15th. So I'm anytime during this period, and I'll say the cover period in a minute, I couldn't get back to where I was prior to February 15th due to compliance with requirements established or guidance issued by the Secretary of Health, Human Service, CDC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're all there. During the period beginning on March 1st through December 31st, related to the maintenance of standards of sanitation, social distancing, or any other worker or customer safety requirement related to COVID. Boy, does that cover a lot. If you have a retail space or whatever, like you couldn't open up, like you couldn't allow customers in, even if you're open now, you're at a percentage and a ratio. That period for which they give you there, that's pretty much March through the end of the year. A lot of folks are going to want to spend a lot of time getting inside of that safe harbor right there and be able to walk away from the FTE test. The next bullet down, and I'll come back to that, but the next bullet down, there are other safe harbor tests as it relates to the FTE, and they used the December 31st as the qualifying date or payroll. The calculation has so many variations and possibilities. We just reach out to somebody and touch base if you don't think you can fulfill what it is in section B. And then there's always the safe harbor of you didn't reduce anybody at any point through this entire thing, and you don't, it doesn't matter to you because you don't have a reduction. All right, so we'll move along. Oh, I'm sorry, before we move along, the lingering concern that we have on B is in a lot of ways is able to document an inability. So they didn't define what document meant, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, but okay, we'll move along. Now, yesterday morning, they added the EZ application. And this is the checklist. Again, don't read from regs very much, but this gooley-garp can't make it up, so we just added it in here so you had it as a reference. The first buck, and this gets you the ability to use the EZ form, which basically then you're just putting your costs on the form and you don't do any of the reduction tests. It's easier, not necessarily easy, because you still have to calculate all your payroll costs and all your other costs and get them together. First box, if you're a self-employed individual, independent contractor, sole proprietor, basically you file a Schedule C, check mark the box, and you're going to be in on the EZ form. This is why we think they're going to essentially make it very easy for those self-employed folks to obtain forgiveness and relieve a little bit of the stress on the banks from trying to look at all of the I don't want to minimize it, but the smaller loans. And frankly, probably the ones that needed it the most, because they had to do the work, they're doing all the work themselves. They didn't have employees. So check the box. You're doing the easy, the 2483 easy. So next bucket, you have, I'll sum all this down. No rate reduction. That's what the second paragraph is. So you didn't have to deal with any of the rate reduction that we talked about there, and you didn't have salaries over 100. That the third paragraph, and so you have to put these two together. So if you have no rate reduction and you have no FTE reduction, you can use the Z form, qualified by the dates and stuff in this paragraph. Third, and we think that there's potential for decent amount of people to fall in here, but there's some risk, and you want to make sure that you do qualify for this. Again, let's see, fourth paragraph down, second from the bottom, no rate reduction, very similar in nature to the others. And then the last paragraph goes back to our previous slide. Bar was unable to operate during the COVID period at the same level of business activity as before February 15th due to compliance with all the stuff we talked about earlier. So you didn't have a rate reduction and you met the FTE safe harbor requirement, you get to use the EZ. All right. Other major changes, and I know I'm blowing through this, folks. There's a lot here, and I apologize. This one's actually pretty big, but doggone, the poor banks took it on the chin on this one. Good for businesses, though, and ultimately, I think it's going to be a big win for everybody. Minimum maturity. They changed the 2-year term to a 5-year term for all loans that were obtained after June 5th. June 5th happens to be the day of the Flexibility Act. Now, for loans obtained prior to June 5th, you can ask your bank to give you the 5 years, and they are totally allowed to do so. Unfortunately for them, they have to update and repaper all the loans that they do, and we're seeing a sense that most banks are probably leaning towards the model of, if you have forgiveness letter, if you have a loan that you end up with, allowing that to go out. And I can't speak for any of the banks that may or may not be on this webinar, but a lot of them are really, really trying to help their customers and their clients. And they've already been talking about how they facilitate that, because it's a huge lift for them to have to figure out how to do all that. Next thing, and this is pretty big as well. Originally, if you took a PPP loan, you were not eligible to defer your payroll taxes. That was another part of the CARES Act. They've adjusted that and went back and retroactively changed that in the CARES Act. And now if you obtained a PPP loan, you can defer your payroll taxes for the rest of this year and pay them back 50% in 2021, 50% in 2022. Pretty huge cash flow helper there if you're in that situation. From a practical matter, be very careful. It's still due, and that's going to be a huge cash flow issue, not this year, obviously, but the next 2 years. So just plan for it if you do it. Very quick. Loan repayments. They changed the period of time for which you would have to start paying back your loan. Now your loan payments start when the forgiveness amount is remitted to lender. We read that to mean when the SBA tells the bank how much they're going to forgive, your loan starts and your loan payments are due at that point moving forward. The next thing I think is relevant, but I imagine most people want to get it over with, 10 months to apply for forgiveness after the covered period. So if your covered period ends, on June 30th, you have 10 months after that to actually apply for your forgiveness. I have a little note here, just, as you're going through all this stuff, the banks they're getting data as fast as we are, and it shows up on the SBA website with the same ability for anyone to decipher on the exact same day, and it's never convenient. So be patient with your bankers. They are trying to do the best they can. Be patient with your accountants and your lawyers and your insurance people. The two last things real quick. I got 2 minutes because I got about 10 for questions. Originally in the CARES Act, it said that the forgiveness was not going to be taxable. Technically, that's true. They said they were not going to tax the cancellation of debt income. Well, they didn't. IRS came out and issued guidance that said, we just don't plan to allow you to take the deductions associated with the PPP proceeds that were forgiven. So they didn't tax the income. They just removed your expenses on the expenses associated with it, i.e. they taxed it with saving face. That's my personal take on that. With that, I'm going to say just two things real quick. The importance of, and this is, I've said this on every single one of my webinars, so it's not a shameless plug, but it kind of is. Utilize your chambers. The chambers and your trade associations are phenomenal resources for data. Be in touch with your accountants, your lawyers, your bankers. Make sure that you're solidifying what you need to do next. And one of the really big important things is documentation. I'll say this real quick. I'm a little over. I mentioned earlier, they said that you needed to be able to have the ability to document that you were impacted. One of the elements in there that they mentioned was financial data. So your financials during this period. Well, some of you are going to rebound and your financial statements are going to look better by year end. Make sure that you're keeping your books good so that you can prove out what was going on during the specific periods of time as this was happening, so that you can document, when you were impacted and how that, and document what you were thinking when you made the application. Like, AR is going to stretch, my customers are all shut down, all those things. Document. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Brett for the questions and answers.
All right. Thanks, Brad. Take a minute to catch your breath there. We will be taking questions. We've gone through about 15 questions. One of the themes that I noticed is a lot of the answers consisted of, please contact us, with staff members giving out phone numbers and emails, or it's a question for the bank. We're not doing this to try to create extra work or extra conversations. There's a lot of variables and almost every situation is a bit unique. And so we just need to get some more information to be able to answer your questions. And that is what we're here for, to help with and to answer these questions. So we'll let everyone again catch their breath. As a reminder, we will be sending out the slides after the webinar. But if there are any additional questions that haven't been answered yet, please go ahead and submit them now.
And while they're submitting those, just like to again thank Caitlin and Rick and all the folks at the Chamber for helping us put this on. As Brett mentioned, we've been working kind of round the clock for the last 6 months. We want to try to help. Obviously we're a business too, and we're trying to get our name out there, but we want to try to help those folks in the Chamber, our banking partners, our attorney partners. And, I can't tell you the network of people that it takes to get through all this stuff and make sure that everybody's on the same page. It's been an amazing professional experience, and you know, we want to be here to help.
All right, well, it looks like we don't see any additional questions. So obviously our information, oh, here we go. All right, so we have a thank you for Brad. And then is there any guidance or update on PPP compliance and impact with government contractors, in particular with contracts that are FAR Part 31?
Well, that is definitely very specific. I know Najee Lakis, our research guy, he spent some time with our government contractors on working through those issues. Please feel free to reach out to him or shoot us your info, and he'll reach out to you and help you at least head in the right direction on that.
Yeah, and that was exactly what I was getting to, Brad, was for any additional questions that anyone has, our info is up there. We ask that you reach out and let us know your questions, and we'll connect you with the right person to get you some answers. Again, we just want to thank the Chamber as well as everyone who attended today. Again, our ultimate goal is to help businesses the best way that we can get through this process, and that's what we're here for. So again, thank you, and everyone have a great day.